Hello and welcome back to the Ron Talks Tabletop podcast. Today I have a very special guest, like I always do, because all my guests are special. Somebody in the industry that I've been looking forward to talking to for a long time now. I'm going to have him introduce himself. So who are you?
Hi, I'm Len Pimentel. I've written a couple of tabletop role-playing games, probably the largest and best known of which is Prowlers and Paragons Ultimate Edition, as well as the original Prowlers and Paragons. And I've also written some other stuff, including By This Axe I Hack There and Hack Again, Black Star, and some other stuff before that.
That's great. And I'm looking forward to talking about all that stuff and more. So you didn't start off your hobby designing games, I would imagine. There had to be an origin at some point. So how did you get into the role-playing hobby or hobby gaming in general?
So I'm 10,000 years old. And back when I was in 6th grade, there was a magazine called Dynamite. And in that Dynamite magazine, and if I'm not mistaken, Gil Gerard and Wilma Deering were on the cover of that particular Dynamite magazine because it was talking about the Buck Rogers TV show at the time. But I'm pretty sure it was that one. Again, I might be wrong. But it was a Dynamite magazine that had an article about this weird game called Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay.
And the article kind of caught my attention. I had recently read The Hobbit, and I was sort of primed to be interested in this stuff. And I got my dad to go out to Toys R Us and buy the basic D&D set, which was not the red box. It was the magenta box at the time with the Errol Otis cover. And I didn't understand it at all. But with the assistance of some friends who were smarter than me, we eventually figured out what it was all about. And that was the beginning of the end.
Okay, so first of all, what is Dynamite Magazine? Because this is the first I've heard of it.
Yeah, Dynamite Magazine was a sort of a semi-educational magazine for preteens that would have, a bunch of different sort of preteen interest articles. So there was, like, for example, there was a magazine about Gil Gerard and Wilma Deering. I mean, and the woman who plays Wilma Deering, rather, on the Buck Rogers show. And then it was just a sort of cute preteen magazine to get kids reading kind of thing.
That's cool. It sounds like the type of thing that I would have read at around that age had I heard about it. But you started with the basic set with the Errol Otis cover.
Yes, sir.
That is, what year is that? That's early 80s, right?
Yeah, we're talking early 80s. Yeah, for sure. We're talking what is it, 82 maybe? I mean, I got to do a little math here, but let's just leave it at early 80s. Yes, I am.
Yeah.
I'm squarely at the tail end of Gen X, where I've been called that I'm in the boomer light section of Gen X.
Okay. So, I started in 87 with the Elmore red box.
Elmore red box, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so.
Right, I was about to say, that's the one written by Frank Menser, which is probably, I think, a better one in terms of being an introduction. But, for me, and some people, it's one of those things, it's like Guy Ritchie films. The first one you see is the one that you think is the best. So if you saw Lock, Stock, and Smoking Barrels first, that's your favorite. I saw Snatch first, that's my favorite. And so it's the same thing. For me, the Moldvay Cook magenta box is perfect, notwithstanding the fact that I wasn't able to understand it.
Right. Yeah, the Mentor box had that great solo adventure and everything like that. And so
yeah, y'all were traumatized apparently because
yes,
y'all see, all I needed to say that is immediately start shaking and everything.
I saw a great shirt with Alina the Cleric in the vein of Kill Bill, except it was Kill Bargo.
That's awesome.
That's great. I have to get one of those. Great. So obviously you started playing with basic D&D. Were there any other role-playing games that you got into early on?
Yeah, a whole lot. I was loose and lascivious when it came to role-playing games.
Okay.
I mean, I went from basic D&D, we then got advanced D&D, then there was Gamma World, Top Secret, Star Wars, West End game, and then a bunch of other stuff that we sort of dabble. We played a lot of Rollmaster. We discovered Rollmaster, kind of because of the Lord of the Rings connection is what drew me in and got me interested. And we played that for a while, so we played a good little bit of Traveler, not a ton of it, but a little bit. We played a touch of Call of Cthulhu, but we weren't mature enough to appreciate the horror aspect, so we kind of cast that aside pretty quick because we wanted to just kill stuff and be heroes.
Right, yeah, Call of Cthulhu is not exactly that. Although some later variations on that, you
Yeah,
get
like
more
Delta
to the point.
Green
Yeah.
and stuff like that. But we were certainly not mature enough to appreciate what it was trying to do. We were still young and wanted to just be, butt kickers. Golly, I hope so. Yeah.
All right, so we'll get to the big superhero game talk in a moment, but like, did you play any superhero role-playing games?
Oh, for sure. We played the heck out of Villains and Vigilantes.
Okay.
And then when Marvel Face Rip, TSR's Marvel game came out, we played that as well. I also bought the DC game, the Mayfair DC game, which I think mechanically, design-wise, structurally, a more brilliant game, but it just didn't have that curb appeal the way Marvel did, and so we ended up playing a lot more Marvel. So it was V&V for a while until Marvel came out, and then Marvel kind of knocked V&V aside, and we played a lot of Marvel. Then after that, flirted a little bit with DC here and there. Probably the one big one that I didn't really touch very much was Champion.
Neither did I.
No.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I think Marvel Superhero is the only classic superhero game that I played. But I've certainly heard of everything that you mentioned and have seen or advertised in Dragon Magazine or what have you. So there was a lot of superhero games, even from pretty much the beginning, right? So obviously you've had an experience with a lot of role-playing games. At some point, you just decided to start designing. So how many of those games did you GM?
Oh, lots of them, almost all of them. I wasn't
Okay.
the only GM, but I was definitely one of the recurring GMs. We had 2 or 3 people in the group who enjoyed GMing when I was growing up, and I was one of them.
Okay.
So I was definitely, on the short rotating list.
Right. Well, and having the opportunity to be on the other side of the screen was definitely a bonus. That's the luxury. So at some point in time, you started to design games. So I just wanted to know, like, when did you first start designing RPGs, and what do you like about it?
I would need a lot of therapy to be able to answer that second question, but we'll see what I can do. I think that probably the beginning was just tinkering Marvel superheroes, the original Marvel superheroes yellow set, right?
Okay, right.
The first thing I did was at that time, games were a little bit more simulationist. I know that term is a little bit out of vogue right now, but in this case, what I'm talking about is the games were a little bit more concerned with accurately simulating the reality of the game world. And Marvel comes along and it's like, hey, you have a certain strength which lets you lift 1 ton, another strength which lets you lift 10 tons, and another strength which lets you lift 50 tons. And to me, as a little kid, I'm like, wow, there's quite a gap in there that you guys have left open. And it bugged me at the time. And so I started tinkering with ideas of ways to close the gap. And I even sent a letter to TSR with my thoughts and suggestions about it. And they were kind enough to send a letter back saying, hey, that they were actually working on something and they thought my ideas were interesting and so on. And then they came out with the Marvel Advanced set maybe a year later. So clearly they were thinking
right.
kind of those lines. But so very early on, if I didn't like something or if I liked it but thought it could be better, I started tinkering with it and trying to make it better. I started then just after doing that, I kind of got the little taste for it and I started creating my own Star Wars game. And I spent about a year and change trying to make up a Star Wars game. And then West End Star Wars came along and I'm like, well, so much for that because this game is amazing. But I think that put the little fire, got the little fire going of wanting to design things and wanting them to work the way I wanted them.
Okay, cool. So you sound like your path to design is a pretty common path because all those guys start as game masters that drift the system more to their liking, to fix a problem or to enhance something. A lot of us never cross the line from from GM who house rules to just straight up designer.
That's because you're smart. Don't do it. But I think some people just have an inherent impulse to tinker. Some people will tinker with cars. Some people will tinker with electronics. I, who have no talent in any of those things, tinker with rule sets because I've always liked math. I mean, at least pre-calculus math.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, what's your first design credit?
My first design credit was probably a game called TNT, the Narrative Toolbox, which was the first game I released on Drive-Thru RPG.
Okay.
And it was a completely narrative. You know, it's an RPG where you roll the dice, and the roll of the dice doesn't tell you whether you succeed or fail. The roll of the dice tells you who gets to narrate what happens. And it was inspired by John Wick videos. At the time, he was doing a bunch of videos called Santa Vaca. And that kind of inspired me and got me thinking, and I bought a bunch of his games, including Wilderness of Mirrors. And that kind of motivated me to do basically a generic narrative engine game, and that was TNT.
Okay, cool. I played Wilderness of Mirrors at Dragon Con one year.
Nice.
Yeah, but it was the A team.
That's awesome.
Yeah, somebody drifted Wilderness. Yeah. So speaking of
that, well, we actually used TNT for my friends here. We used TNT for a pulp game that lasted. I mean, it lasted 6 months, 7 months, which for us is pretty solid. So, but they were, you know, pulp archaeologists and explorers trying to collect mystical artifacts before the German chancellor and his folks were collecting those artifacts. So it was before, you know, it was happening in the 1930s, and it was strongly inspired by the game Hollow Earth Expedition.
Okay.
Terrific game.
Yep. I've heard lots of good things about Hollow Earth Expedition.
It's awesome.
Yeah. What's the story behind Prowlers Paragons?
It's so funny because this is a question I've answered a couple of times, and it's
I'm sure you have.
So
yeah, how do we get there? Yeah.
I had the bug for designing a game for a while, and I was designing a universal role-playing game. That was my idea. My idea was to design GURPS Lite, because GURPS was the universal role-playing game, but it was very crunchy. And I thought, you know what? GURPS is a great game, but it doesn't do high adventure. It doesn't feel high adventure because of how crunchy it is and all this stuff. And so I'm going to design a GURPS, but for high adventure. And I'd worked on it for years. In fact, I had like discs and printouts in my car one time in a briefcase, and my car was broken into and the briefcase was stolen, and I had to start everything all over again because I had. Yeah, and it was the best thing in the world because it was much better after that. but it was very frustrating at the time, needless to say. But in any case, so I was plugging along with this, and then Shane Hensley and Clint Black released Savage Worlds. And I buy the book and I start reading through it, and I'm like, well, okay then. Yeah. So that's
I can understand that response.
So yeah, there you go. And I was thinking back about the Star Wars game, and I'm like, okay, this is gonna be a recurring theme, I guess. And so I'm like, yeah, whatever I was working on was cute and nice and fun, but this thing's brilliant. Yeah, they just kicked my booty. So what am I going to do now? But the funny part is, while I was designing my sort of universal RPG, when you're designing a universal RPG, it's very easy to accidentally design a superhero game. Because if you're thinking about powers and you're thinking about spells and you're thinking about psionics and you're trying to be generic and universal, golly, there's a fair bit of overlap with basically supers. I still had the design bug. My generic system was dead. So I'm like, you know what? Maybe I need to nudge this in the direction of full-on supers. And that's how the first edition of P&P came about.
Okay. I've never played the first edition. I learned about it a decade ago and I read it and thought, man, this is a neat little game. But like, I was very heavily into another Fate. I was big into Fate.
I think at that time, Fate was the flavor
it was.
Everybody was all Fate all the time.
Yeah. So it was like but I remember really liking what I read, right? But yeah. But it's, there's so many games out there, so little time.
Lousy with choices right now. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we sure. But, particularly So, what is it about superhero games? I mean, we have so many of them out there, right? We got as far as fantasy is concerned, we got like D&D, which was the first published role-playing game of any type, and other fantasy games and everything like that. But it seems like the superhero genre just doesn't get enough love. And then like we have a million different superhero games out there. So of the ones that do get love, it's pretty much, from my experience, Mutants and Masterminds and Champions, and I think Champions just because of its legacy, right?
Right.
But like everybody's made a superhero game.
I think that might be kind of connected to what I mentioned before, which is, like I said, I mean, I don't want this to be taken too seriously, but I think it's easy to accidentally fall backwards into having this. There's a Stephen Wright joke, which is, I wrote a children's book by accident. And I think this is kind of like that, where as you're designing something else and you're thinking if it's got any sort of supernatural power element to it, it's sort of, you can see how if you just push it a little bit farther, you wind up with a superhero game, right? Which is probably how even though the White Wolf people, the vampire, werewolf, and those people came out with, what is it called? Aberrant?
Yeah.
Right? Even they had a superhero game. Again, based on the same system, because I'm sure they were looking at the werewolf powers and the vampire powers. And look, the Venn diagram of people who like fantasy and people who like comic books and superheroes, there's got to be a fair bit of overlap there. So, I think it's easy to, again, sort of stumble into it or realize that you're close enough that if you put a little bit of effort, you can actually do something. Although it's a neat genre in its possibilities. It's a genre of entirely open possibilities. That's hard not to like.
That's true. And I think it's also hard to nail down a genre that, like, a large percentage of the community would be into. I think D&D kind of nailed the default fantasy, right? Whereas the
fantasy
superheroes
products outsell everything else by a factor of, I think, at least 2 to 1. Sci-fi coming in, I think, a distant second, and then so you take all the fantasy stuff, not just D&D. But if it's fantasy, it's probably going to sell twice as much as, again, on average across the board. There's, of course, exceptions all over the place. But yeah.
And I think also a difficulty in the superhero genre is that there's so many different types of superhero stories coming to the table. You really need everybody to be on the same page. We're not, whether they're going to be playing Iron Age or Golden Age or comedy.
Yeah, I will share that I think the superhero genre is so titanically large, not just in terms of your power level of your characters, and not just in terms of even where your characters are, like whether you're at the streets of New York or your galaxy-spanning heroes, right, like Guardians of the Galaxy or the Legion of Superheroes. It's not even that.
Right.
It's at the end of the day, superhero games are a combination of power trip, empowerment fantasy, and soap opera. And you've got to really figure out, I think there's a lot of room for a lot of different superhero games because there's a lot of different room to do stuff. Like if you want to just punch a bunch of bad guys, there's absolutely room for that. And then conversely, if you want to struggle with the realities of being a teenager who's hiding the fact that they are Spider-Man from Aunt May, it's an entirely different game. And if you really want that to be the focus, it's an entirely different rule set to support a completely different kind of play, right?
Yeah. I mean,
so let's say you could be Spider-Man. Forget about different places and different galaxies. You could literally have 3 different superhero games that are all about being Spider-Man. That's it. And the streets of New York. Because one is about really focused on the interpersonal element. One is maybe more of your traditional role-playing game where you follow a path and you fight some villains and you solve some puzzles and whatever. And one might be more like a battle royale kind of thing where it's really about the mechanics of the battle, almost like like the HeroClix games, right? There's some RPGs that are almost HeroClix in nature. All of those are perfectly valid superhero RPGs, just about Spider-Man.
Right. That's certainly true. And so I guess that's why we have such a hard time with. I don't think we need to coalesce around a single game, but just I guess being seeing more superhero games out there being played, and
Yeah.
yeah.
And I
So
think that's a great thing. Prowlers and Paragons I mean, I'm biased. I designed it, and that means I'm gonna like it because I designed a game that I want to play, if that makes sense, right? So
yes,
presumably I'm gonna like it because I designed it with the mechanics that I think are fun.
right.
So, but the fact of the matter is Prowlers and Paragons doesn't do everything best. Like Masks does some of the interpersonal stuff way better than Prowlers and
Yeah.
Paragons.
It's incredible. Yeah.
And Villains and Vigilantes does the sort of random character creation and see what you get, whatever, better than Prowlers and Paragons. And Marvel Superheroes, the old classic game, does we're going to have a silly slugfest. And don't think like the role is going to tell you what happens and whether you smash somebody through a wall or whatever, And yes, it's true. The guard's guns only do 6 points of damage, but just go with it. Marvel does that just like, let's have fun and just go with it, beer and pretzels, probably better than it. So every game does different things really well.
That's true. Speaking about our specific game, which I brought you on today to talk about. So we talked about first edition. Obviously, we've had a discussion about superhero RPGs and the various aspects. But how do we get from first edition to Ultimate Edition, which is the edition that's out in print right now?
Well, just so you know, you can get the other edition from Drive-Thru RPG if you are so inspired. But
That's right.
Ultimate Edition happened because I think Sean Patrick Fannin reached out and said he finally looked over first edition of P&P and he really liked it. And he wanted to see about doing a second edition of the game with me, kind of taking that original game and changing it to a certain degree, bringing in a little bit more texture to the rules, adding a little bit of, for lack of a better word, a little bit of complexity. But
yeah, texture is a term for that. Yeah.
Thank you. Because he was basically looking to add a little bit of complexity and a little bit of nuance to the game. I remember being fairly resistant to that at the time because I was still early as a designer. It's weird, but sometimes I'm learning that I think some games that read very well play less well. And some games, if they're too elegant in their design, sometimes the play can be dull. And I think actually original P&P may have suffered from that. I think it was a fairly elegant design, but that doesn't make it the best game. Like it needed a little bit more stuff, again, a little bit more texture, a little bit more stuff that people could latch onto and play with. Because a role-playing game is as much a toy as a rule set. And I didn't have the toy part as good at it at the time. So with Sean's help, we kicked a bunch of stuff around back and forth and play tested stuff for years and kicked stuff around for years. And after several years of bouncing stuff back and forth and ridiculous amounts of play testing, finally released Prowlers and Paragons Ultimate Edition.
It's kickstarted in 2019 and it's 2024. So it's been out for a while. And as I shared before we started recording, it's a game that I really enjoyed. As a matter of fact, I think during the Kickstarter, I released a video just going over the basics of the game.
You did, and thank you.
Yeah. I've been excited about this game for a long time. Well, it's my favorite superhero system. And it's a real shame I don't get to play it as much as I'd like to. But really, folks, you should check out Prowlers and Paragons Ultimate Edition. Also, while you're at it, go and check out first edition too, because it's still a very viable game to play. And if Ultimate Edition doesn't do it for you, maybe first edition will do it for you.
I'm biased. I like them both. So
yeah, I figured. I mean, why else would first edition still be out there? Yeah, but it's been around for 5 years now, and you're a designer, so like you have the itch to design, to tinker.
Yes, sir. In fact, for the people who are in our Prowlers and Paragons Facebook group and in our Discord channel, I actually just recently released, this is not like a formal whatever, it's just a free, I released like 22 pages of, it's called an errata, but it's not really an errata because it's not really fixing mistakes. It's really just rules tweaks and suggestions, and after a bunch more play, some things that looking back now I wish I would have done differently, and you know, if we ever do another edition, that I will do differently, just different takes on some things, on some aspects of the rules that weren't as fleshed out as I wanted to, all that good stuff. But it's basically like 22 extra pages of stuff that I just had to get out of my system.
Yeah, and so and that's what I was alluding to with the question. I know that there were things that you wanted to change or modify about Prowlers and Paragons, the Ultimate Edition anyway, and
Yep.
that you've been doing that. In my opinion, I kind of look at that as a little bit of like a unearthed arcana type of thing. It's just rules tweaks. Okay, you don't like this power, try it this way. And I'm willing to bet that Sean has his own document,
Oh,
right?
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm
So
sure. In fact, I know he's been working on something that I don't know if I can say anything about, but I know he's been kicking something around too.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, not surprised. Completely unsurprised by that. It's really a great game. And I'm not surprised that you've been, working on, changes and modifications. By the way, the stuff in the book is perfectly playable, folks. Um, it really is. You
I'm
don't.
happy to say that some of the people who are fans of the game are like, look, this stuff's great, but we don't want to change anything. We like everything the way it is. And that
Yeah.
obviously doesn't make you unhappy as a designer. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. So in the beginning, I know you mentioned some other role-playing games, and you designed games before Prowlers and Paragons. I know you've continued to design after the release of Ultimate Edition. So what other RPGs have you designed? Can you talk about that and like some
Oh,
highlights and everything?
so from completely different, in a completely different vein, probably the stuff that I've done recently that I'm happiest with. I've done a sci-fi game called Black Star, which is basically a very rules light space opera game. I've shown you before that it's the size of a sort of Steve Jackson pocket box game. It's basically 44 pages that are like what, 5 by 6 or something. It looks really good on a phone because of the size. It's so small that you can see it on a phone or a tablet terrifically. And it's I've heard it called Star Wars with the serial numbers filed off, and it certainly has a strong inspiration, for space opera. And it's rules light, but it's for 44 pages, but it's got a whole bunch of characters, a whole bunch of archetypes. There's spaceship. People were surprised, like you even have like showdown like at high noon rules. I'm like, well, yeah, you have to have that. So
Right.
there's NPCs and there's there's spaceship rules, aliens rules, and all that in a fairly small package. That's actually become a platinum seller on Drive-Thru RPG.
Oh wow.
So thankfully people have. So it's called Black Star, and then there's a Black Star companion. So people seem to have been excited about that. I think because it's fairly rules light, but sometimes rules light games leave too much for the game master to just make a call. And I think you can be rules light, but still provide the GM the tools they need so that they're not just guessing when they're adjudicating stuff.
Right. What's the basic mechanic of Black Star, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't.
How does it work?
Don't mind at all. Basically, there's 10 abilities. Abilities combine stats and skills. Whenever you're making a roll against something, you roll 2 dice, add your ability. You're trying to get 9 or higher. If you get 9 or higher, you succeed. If you get less than 9, you have 3 options. 1, you fail. 2, you can spend a point of resolve to roll again. 3, you can spend a point of resolve to succeed with a complication.
Okay.
So the simple mechanic is you roll 2 dice, you add a number, trying to get 9 or higher. If you succeed, you succeed. If you fail, you get 3 options. You fail, or you can spend a point of resolve for one of the 2 other options, either re-rolling or succeeding, but with a complication. Now, here's the wrinkle and the stuff that I think, the one wrinkle that I think makes the game kind of neat. That point of resolve you spend, that's also your hit points. Because the game acknowledges that this is a sort of action movie, that it's an action adventure story. So whenever you get hurt, you lose resolve. Getting hurt isn't really you getting shot in the arm and shaking it off. Good Lord, no, that's terrible. For most of the time you get hurt or you take damage, it's your character kind of shrugging off the majority of it. It's your character getting lucky and getting scraped rather than taking a direct shot kind of thing.
Yeah, and that was the really the intention of hit points in the first place?
Right. Well, that's exactly it. So the intention of hit points was that they're this abstract pool as well. So what I said was, well, if hit points really are this abstract rule, let's not be mushy about it. Let's be black and white. Resolve is your hit points, and it's entirely abstract, and it's really your lucky I'm still alive points. So when you use a point of resolve to like re-roll a failed roll, you're literally using up your hit points. So you're always balancing your, for lack of a better word, your hit points with your meta currency to succeed when you fail. So it's fairly simple, but that's basically the core mechanic. And the end result is that the game moves very fast. You can resolve things very quickly. Characters, like I said, have 10 stats that basically cover everything. So you've got blasting, brawling, diplomacy, discipline, instinct, intellect, speed, strength, tools, transports. That's it. So you have your stats, and then you have, every character has a couple of special abilities, and that's it. They're very, very rules-light game, but there's, circling back to that word texture, there's enough texture in describing combat and non-combat and everything that the GM isn't just flailing to make things up whenever the players have it, try to do so.
Got it.
So
that sounds pretty cool.
Thank you. And then there's a Black Star Companion, which has rules for psionics. Black Star has rules for something called resonance, but and there are good and bad resonance users. But if you want to be a more traditional sci-fi without that mystical field, energy field, you could just have regular psionics, and that's in the companion. And they're both tiny little 44-page booklets. Yes. And I think they're both like $4 as PDFs.
That sounds pretty neat.
Thank you.
It sounds more like what the big sci-fi IP should be rather than the multi-volume, multi-100-page books that the current game is. Although, great game. I'm not
100%. It's not about one game being better. It's just about what you feel like playing at the moment.
Yeah.
It's just about the of the other games I've designed. One of them is called, there's a game called Black Hack, which is an OSR sort of spin on a D&D. Great. And every hack of the Black Hack usually has the word hack in it. So I made a Black Hack called There and Hack Again. Okay. Obviously, it's a Tolkien-inspired game. One Ring is an absolutely amazing, fantastic, incredible game. But there's a lot to that game, and maybe more than you feel like interfacing with. Okay, if you want to do something that's sort of classic fantasy without as much to sort of handle, well, you could try, BXD&D, which is perfect. But if you wanted something that's kind of geared specifically towards that classic fantasy thing, well, There and Hack Again.
Okay.
And I have another one.
I did not make that connection, and I love the One Ring, which is.
Yeah, well, obviously, right, is it's a There and Hack Again is of course a reference to There and Back Again.
Right, yeah.
So, and then there's a Conan sort of sword and sorcery game that I released called By This Axe I Hack, which is a reference to By This Axe I Rule from. Yeah. And in fact, right now I'm working on an updated Conquerors edition of that game, which I hope to release before the end of the year.
Oh, nice.
But that's a sword and sorcery game. And I've fallen, when I read the Black Hack, I fell in love with it. And so I've had a couple of designs, two of which I've published. That's There and Hack Again and By This Axe I Hack, covering my two favorite fantasy genres, gentle, happy, Tolkien-inspired, and ugly, brutal, Robert E. Howard inspired.
Right.
Opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yes, they are. And I think popular subgenres themselves, which I'm a fan of. Yep. Both of those. So what else do you have coming down the line since we're on that?
I think for now, that's about it of the items I can discuss. I'm actually, for Black Star, looking to get a print version that's larger, because the core version really is like Steve Jackson pocket box size. It's very small. And I've had a number of people reach out to me going, could you please make it a little bit bigger because I'm old? I have trouble reading it. And so I've had a few people ask me to see if I could put out a larger version. So I may be putting a larger version out on Drive-Thru RPG. I'm flattered that people have asked. But in terms of new stuff, that's probably what I can talk about right now. Oh, there is one thing. I'm writing an adventure for the Heroic, another superhero RPG.
Okay.
I'm writing an adventure for Heroic. My friend Bear had a successful Kickstarter. Needs some help in terms of writing one of the sampled adventures in the book. So I'll be working on that.
That's great. That's fantastic. I've heard of Heroic before. It sounds like it's going to be really neat. Bit of a nostalgia trip.
Yeah, it's basically Marvel. It's the classic Marvel superheroes face rip, but improved. Like all the good stuff of it, the tables and that sort of what we were talking about before, that fun, roll dice and see what happens stuff. That's all still there. But a lot of the stuff that kind of annoyed us as kids, the stuff that doesn't quite make sense, like, hey, Spider-Man should be able to dodge that. And all that stuff is now addressed. Some modern sensibilities brought to bear on the classic frame.
So I have one more question for you, Len, and it's not coming as a surprise because I sent these ahead of time. So hopefully you have an answer. Len, what is one interesting thing about you that people may not know about?
One interesting thing about me that people may not know about. So there are answers, but I struggled with what answer I want to provide that I feel comfortable putting out there into the internet ether. So I will respond with, I was a very active swing dancer for quite a while. And in the late 90s, I don't remember what year it was, the Super Bowl was in Miami. 98, 97 maybe, not sure. But the Super Bowl was in Miami that year. And I was picked as one of the dancers at the halftime show, the Super Bowl, because it was a swing themed halftime show. Now,
Oh, wow.
I had to bow out, unfortunately, because I was working as an attorney at the time, and the amount of the time investment was required was just not gonna be feasible. So I had to bow out of it. But as it happens, my friend and I, she and I were selected to dance in the Super Bowl.
Oh, wow.
Along with a bunch of our other friends who were all the swing kids at that time.
Yeah, but I mean that's still pretty cool, even though you didn't
Yes.
get a chance to do it. But
I think it's pretty cool.
well, Len, thank you for coming on to my podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I had a terrific time, and I'm always honored and surprised when somebody wants to talk to me, but more than happy to do it.
Great. Maybe I have you on in the future. We'll see. Like I said, Prowlers and Paragons is my favorite superhero game, and you have other games. I mean, I have a lot to check out.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
All right, folks, that was the Ron Talks Tabletop podcast. Thank you for watching and listening, and until next time, see you later.